The day I married Marissa feels like it happened a lifetime ago, even though it's only been a couple of years. Standing under that arch, with the sunlight filtering through the trees, I believed every word she said. Every vow she whispered, her hand fitting perfectly in mine, her eyes full of that spark, like she truly meant it when she promised me, forever. I thought I was the luckiest man on earth, looking at a woman who seemed to want the same things I did, a home, a family, a future we'd build together. The music played, the guests clapped, and I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into something out of a dream. But now, looking back, I realize it wasn't a dream at all. It was a performance, and I had no idea I was just playing my part. Marissa had a way of making you believe whatever she wanted you to. I didn't see it back then. I was too caught up in the moment, too sure that love was all we needed to make it work. I was wrong, but on that day, I didn't know any better. I stood there, grinning like an idiot, thinking this was the start of something real. We danced beneath the stars, her head resting on my shoulder, and in that moment, I told myself this was it, that everything was finally falling into place. But I didn't notice the way her smile stiffened when I talked about waiting a few years before having kids, or how her laugh sounded a little off when I mentioned how my startup was taking up most of my time. I was too caught up in imagining the years ahead, picturing the house we'd buy, the memories we'd make. I never realized those moments were already slipping through my fingers, even as I held her close. After the wedding, we moved into a modest little townhouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, but it was ours. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a kitchen that always had the comforting scent of fresh coffee in the air. Marissa made it feel like home with little details, like the framed photo of us from that trip to Bayview, or the curtains she painted herself. She picked them out because they reminded her of home. I loved coming back to that place after long, exhausting days at the office, even when I was wiped out from pitching investors or fixing bugs in my app. The startup was my other obsession, the dream I poured every ounce of myself into when I wasn't with her. It was supposed to be our way out, our ticket to a better life, more money, more freedom, maybe even that bigger house she kept talking about. She said she understood why I stayed late at work, why I missed dinners. Sometimes, she'd kiss me on the forehead and tell me how proud she was that we were building something together. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think I was doing all this for us. We'd sit on the couch some nights, talking about the future. She'd mention kids, how she dreamed of a son with my eyes, or a daughter with her smile. I'd laugh and say, yeah, someday, but let's get the business off the ground first. She'd nod, but there was always this look in her eyes, like she was waiting for something I wasn't giving her. I didn't make a big deal of it. I thought we had time. I figured we were on the same page, but those conversations started fading away. She stopped asking about baby names or pointing out cribs when we walked by stores. At first, I didn't notice. I was too wrapped up in work, too consumed by meetings and deadlines. My startup was finally picking up steam, and I was riding that wave, thinking I was doing it all for us. I'd come home late, and she'd either be asleep or lost in her phone, barely glancing up. When I walked in, I told myself it was just a phase, that every couple went through times like this. I didn't see the growing distance, the silence where her laughter used to be. I kept pushing forward, kept focusing on the next step, thinking she'd still be there. One night, I came home and found her standing at the kitchen window, her arms crossed tight. I asked her what was wrong, but she just shook her head, said she was tired. I should have pressed her, should have sat her down and forced her to talk, but I didn't. I kissed her cheek, grabbed a beer, and dove into my emails. That became our routine for months, me missing the signs, her pulling further away. Both of us pretending everything was fine. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at me, like she was studying me, trying to figure out if I was still the man she married. I didn't know what she saw, but I knew I wasn't paying enough attention to find out. I was so sure we'd figure it out. I kept telling myself that love was enough to fix whatever was slipping between us. I thought we'd find our way back to those early days, the nights we'd stay up talking about anything and everything, where her smile was all I needed to feel like I mattered. But the truth is, I was losing her, and I didn't even see it. I had no idea she was already rewriting our story, casting me as the fool while she quietly plotted her next move. I didn't know the promises we made under that golden canopy were already falling apart, or that the life I thought we were building was nothing more than a stage for her to play her part. I stood in that townhouse, surrounded by the things we'd chosen together, convinced it was home. I thought it was ours. I thought she was mine, and maybe that's where I went wrong. Not in loving her, but in believing she loved me the same way. I didn't see the cracks in her act. I didn't hear the lies buried in her silence. I just kept living in the dream she built for me, unaware that it was already on the verge of falling apart. I stood there, day after day, thinking we had forever, while she was already halfway out the door. I'm Lucas Reed, and I can still picture that night like it's burned into my memory. The moment everything started to shift. I came home late, as usual, my eyes heavy from staring at spreadsheets, my shoulders stiff from carrying the weight of my startup. The house was too quiet when I walked in. It felt like something was off, like the calm before a storm. Marissa was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a small white box tied with a blue ribbon. She didn't look up when I came in, just pushed the box toward me and said, "Open it." Her voice was soft, but there was something behind it, a challenge, maybe, or a test. I dropped my bag and sat down, completely thrown off guard. I untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a pacifier, small and plastic, and beside it was a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. I stared at it, my mind going blank, like someone had just hit the pause button on everything. "You're serious?" I asked, looking up at her. She nodded, her smile bright but shaky, like she was waiting for me to react the same way. I wanted to feel something, joy, excitement, anything, but all I could feel was a tightening knot in my chest with every passing second. I wasn't ready. Not for this. Not now. All I could think about were the dreams I was chasing, the startup that was consuming me, the life I thought we were supposed to build together. I wasn't finished yet. I wasn't done. I tried to find the right words, but what came out was, "Marissa, I don't know if I can do this yet." Her smile vanished immediately. Her eyes welled up with tears, and without a word, she stood up and walked away. That night, I slept on the couch, the pacifier sitting on the coffee table, staring at me like an accusation. I didn't know how to fix it, how to be the man she needed. All I knew was that I was drowning in my own thoughts, and I couldn't seem to pull myself out. The days that followed weren't any better. In fact, they were worse. It wasn't like we sat down and hashed things out, really talking about our fears like we should have. Instead, we waged a silent war, one that didn't involve shouting or arguments but was just as destructive. Marissa would sit across from me at breakfast, her hand resting on her flat stomach, and she'd say things like, "You're never here. Do you even care, Callan?" I'd mumble something about work, about how I needed to keep the business afloat, but even to me, it sounded empty. It wasn't a lie, exactly. The startup was draining every minute of my time and energy. But I wasn't telling her the whole truth. I was scared, scared of becoming a father, scared of failing her, scared of losing everything I had been working toward. But I didn't say that. I didn't say that I didn't even know how to be the man she needed me to be. Instead, I let her words hang there, unanswered, and I'd grab my keys and leave the house. Sometimes, I'd hear her crying through the bedroom wall, soft, broken sobs, and I'd stand there, frozen, wanting to go to her, but not knowing what to say. I started staying at the office later and later, finding any excuse to stay away from the tension at home. A client meeting that didn't exist, a bug in the app that could have waited, anything to keep me out of that townhouse, away from her disappointed eyes. I told myself I was giving her the space she needed, that she just needed time to cool off. But deep down, I knew the truth, I was running. Not from her, but from the version of myself I had become. I was failing to be the warmth in our home, the warmth we used to have, filled with laughter and late-night talks. Now it was cold, like someone had flipped a switch. The kitchen didn't smell like coffee anymore. It was empty, like the life had been drained out of it. Marissa had stopped cooking, stopped leaving little notes on the fridge, stopped asking me about my day. I stopped trying to make her smile. It felt like we were just 2 people occupying the same space, moving around each other like ghosts. I'd catch her staring at her phone, her fingers typing fast, and I'd wonder who she was talking to. But I never asked. I didn't want to know, or maybe I was just too afraid of what the answer might be. I kept telling myself it would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other, once the business was settled, once I figured out how to be a father. But each day, the distance between us only seemed to grow. Her tears became like background noise, something I just tuned out, like the hum of the fridge or the creak of the stairs. I hated myself for it, but I didn't stop. I kept moving forward, or at least I told myself that's what I was doing. The truth was, I was just standing still, letting everything I cared about slip through my fingers. Then one night, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, a suitcase by the door. My heart froze. "What's this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. She didn't even look up. She just said, "I need space, Callan. I can't do this alone." I wanted to argue, to tell her I was trying, but the words got stuck in my throat. And then I saw it, the pacifier, sitting on the table, the same one from the box, and it hit me. She was carrying our baby, and here I was, letting her feel like she was in it all alone. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, but she just shook her head and walked to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the suitcase, knowing I had screwed up, but not having a clue how to fix it. I didn't sleep that night. I ended up on the couch, replaying every moment since she handed me that box. Every single time I had the chance to step up and didn't. I kept thinking about the baby, about what it would be like to hold them, to be their father. I wanted to feel something, anything positive, but all I could feel was the weight of everything. Her, the baby, the business, the fact that I was failing at everything. I didn't know how to be enough for her, for them. I didn't know how to stop the spiral we were both caught in. So I did what I'd been doing for weeks, I shut down. I pushed it all down, locked it away in some corner of my mind, and told myself that tomorrow would be different. But tomorrow wasn't different. It was just another day of silence. Another day of her looking at me like I was a stranger. Another day of me proving her right. I'm Callan Rhodes, and the day I left, Marissa still sits in my chest like a heavy stone. I can't shake it. It wasn't some big dramatic scene, no screaming or slamming doors, just a quiet decision. A decision that felt louder than any fight we'd ever had. I came home that night to our townhouse, and the air was thick with the same silence. We'd been suffocating for weeks. Marissa was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, her back to me as usual. I stood in the doorway, watching her, her hand resting on her stomach, our kid, her kid, growing there. I wanted to say something, anything to break the silence that had stretched into a chasm between us, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, all I felt was this overwhelming exhaustion. Not just from the long hours at work, but from carrying the weight of her disappointment, my guilt, and a future that seemed more and more impossible to picture. I hadn't planned on leaving in that moment, but standing there, I knew I couldn't stay either. Not like this. Not when every second in that house was a reminder of how badly I was failing her. So, I made a choice, one I still don't know was brave or just the easy way out. I walked upstairs, grabbed a duffel bag, and started tossing in socks, shirts, a couple pairs of jeans, half my stuff, nothing more. I didn't touch the photos on the dresser, or the watch she'd given me for our first anniversary. I wanted to leave those behind, like they could stay there, holding my place until I figured out what to do. Marissa didn't look up from the stove, didn't ask what I was doing. Maybe she knew, maybe she didn't care. I stood at the counter, scribbling a note on a scrap of paper, handle things however you want, it was cruel. I know that now, cold, vague, like I was washing my hands of her, of us, of the kid. But in my head, it didn't feel like that. I wasn't abandoning her. I was giving her space, letting her figure out what came next without me weighing her down. I was confused, not heartless, but I didn't know how to explain that. I didn't know how to tell her that I wasn't ready to be a father, that I was terrified of being stuck in a life I hadn't even chosen. So, I left the note on the kitchen table, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door. The click of the door shutting behind me felt final. I stood on the porch for a moment, half expecting her to call me back, but she didn't. I got in my car, drove across town to a cheap motel. The kind with neon lights that flickered and sheets that smelled like bleach. I lay on that thin, lumpy mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling like I'd made a decision I couldn't undo. I kept telling myself I'd done the right thing. Marissa deserved more than a husband who couldn't step up, and I needed space to figure out who I was without her asking me to be someone I wasn't. But the truth was, I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't running from her, I was running from the mess I'd made, from the man I was supposed to be. The days after that were a blur. I buried myself in work, staying at the office until late, sleeping on a cot in the break room when I couldn't bear to go back to the motel. Marissa called a few times, left voicemails. I didn't listen to them, didn't reply to the texts. Callan, please, we need to talk. Where are you? Don't do this. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Each message felt like a punch to the gut, but I deleted them. Told myself it was for the best. I wasn't proud of it, but I didn't have the strength to face her either. I kept waiting for the guilt to fade, for the weight to lift off my chest, but it never did. It only got heavier, like it was settling into my bones, becoming a part of me. And no, I never once thought the baby wasn't mine. That thought never crossed my mind. I was scared, sure, but I wasn't that guy, the one who runs from responsibility with excuses. I just needed time, or at least that's what I told myself. Time to think. Time to breathe. Time to make sense of everything that felt like it was speeding past me, out of my control. I spent weeks in that motel, living out of a duffel bag, ordering takeout, pretending I had a grip on things. My startup was doing well, better than well, actually. We landed a small investor, and the app was starting to get some traction. I threw myself into it, letting the numbers and lines of code drown out the noise in my head. I didn't talk to anyone about Marissa, didn't tell any of my friends I'd left. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, like if I stopped moving, I'd have to confront the mess I'd made. Then one day, I got a call from Jake, an old buddy from college who still lived in town. He sounded awkward on the other end, like he wasn't sure if he should be the one to say it, but he asked anyway, "Hey man, you okay?" I ran into Marissa last night at a bar. She was with someone else. My stomach twisted, but I played it off, telling myself it was probably just a friend. Jake didn't press, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the pity. I didn't ask for the details. I didn't want to know, but somehow, that little seed of doubt planted itself in my mind and wouldn't let go. Had she moved on already? It didn't seem possible. Not the Marissa I remembered, the one who cried when I left, the one who begged me to come back. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. The text stopped. The calls went silent. She wasn't fighting for me anymore. That night, I lay awake in the motel room again, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I'd pushed her too far, if I'd really lost her for good. I didn't know what she was doing, who she was with, or what she was planning. All I knew was that I'd walked away, left her to figure it all out alone, and now something was changing, something I couldn't see yet. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that I'd made my choice, and she'd make hers, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. I knew I wasn't ready for whatever came next. I was Callan Rhodes, and the day those court papers arrived at my door, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. By then, I'd moved into a rented apartment, a small step up from the motel, but it was still just bare essentials: couch, bed, a TV I never bothered to turn on. My startup was keeping me busy, the app gaining more users, investors calling, but none of that prepared me for the weight of that envelope. A guy in a cheap suit handed me an envelope. I ripped it open right there in the hallway and saw her name, Marissa Reed. Not Marissa Quinn. Not my wife anymore. Reed. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd remarried already. My eyes kept scanning the page. A court summons. She was claiming child support, housing costs, medical bills, and something called emotional damages. The kid, she said, was mine, and now she was coming for my money. I read it again, slower this time, trying to make sense of it all. 3 months had passed since I walked out. 3 months of silence after her text stopped, and now this. I leaned against the wall, my head spinning, not because of the money, she could have it if she needed it, but because of the name next to hers, Silas Reed. Her new husband. I knew that name. I wish I didn't. She'd mentioned him once or twice when we were still together, always calling him just a coworker. When I asked why she was texting him late at night, I let it slide. Too tired to argue, too trusting to dig deeper. But now it was clear, Silas wasn't just a coworker. He was her husband. And together, they were dragging me into court. There I stood, papers in hand, feeling like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. The day of the hearing came fast. I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to pitch meetings, and drove to the courthouse. My stomach was a tight knot. I hadn't spoken to Marissa, hadn't called her to ask what this was about. What was there to say? She had made her move, and now I had to figure out how to handle it. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into some kind of trap. The place was packed. Lawyers, clerks, strangers all staring at me like I was the show. Marissa was already there, sitting at a table with a man I assumed was Silas. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face seemed sharper, but her hand was still resting on her stomach, rounder now. A reminder of the kid she said was mine. Silas was sitting next to her, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing this smug grin that made my jaw tighten. He leaned over to her, whispered something, and she nodded, her eyes flicking to me for a split second before she quickly looked away. I sat down by myself, no lawyer, just me and the papers they'd served me with. I hadn't hired anyone. Didn't think I needed to. I figured I'd just tell the truth, whatever that was, and let the judge figure it out. The hearing kicked off, and Marissa's lawyer stood up first. He was this wiry guy with glasses who talked like he was selling a story. He called me irresponsible, said I'd abandoned my pregnant wife, refused to support her, and now I was dodging my responsibilities as a father. Each word felt like a punch, twisting the knife, painting me as some deadbeat who'd just run off without a care. I sat there, hands folded, trying to keep my face neutral, but inside I was burning. Not because he was right, he wasn't, but because Marissa was letting him say it. She was sitting there, head held high, while this guy shredded me, and Silas sat next to her, grinning like the game was already won. Then it was Marissa's turn to speak. She stood up. Her voice cut through the room, steady but sharp, like a blade wrapped in a blanket of cold truth. Asterisk, this child is yours, Callan. Asterisk, she said it, looking straight at me, then at the judge. Asterisk, I deserve your money. I've been raising this baby alone because he walked away. Asterisk, the words hit like a punch, and the room went dead silent. Every single pair of eyes was on me, waiting for me to crack. I could feel Silas's chuckle, low and almost amused, cutting through the tension, and that sound made my hands ball into fists beneath the table. I wanted to stand up, shout at her, ask how she could sit there, so calm, as if I was the only one who had ruined everything. But I didn't. I stayed still. My heart was racing, my mind spinning through every moment we'd had, every argument, every silence, every time I'd let her down. I knew I wasn't perfect. Far from it. But this wasn't just about money, or a kid. This was personal. She was trying to bury me, and Silas? He was holding the shovel. The judge turned his gaze on me then, his expression unreadable, and asked if I had anything to say. I opened my mouth, but at first, nothing came out. What could I say? That I didn't even know if the kid was mine? That I had left because I was scared, not because I didn't care? That I had never stopped thinking about her, even after I walked away? None of it felt right, not here, not in front of these strangers. So, I just shook my head and said, "Not yet, Your Honor," before sitting back down. Marissa's lawyer didn't stop. He just kept going, piling on more claims. Backdated support, therapy costs, even money for lost opportunities because she had to quit her job. It felt like a list of demands, each one heavier than the last, piling up in my chest like bricks. Silas sat back in his chair, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk waiting for its prey to make a wrong move. I didn't look at him. Hell, I didn't even look at Marissa. I just stared at the table, trying to steady my breath, trying to figure out what the hell I was even doing here. I'd walked away, thinking I was giving her space to figure things out, but this wasn't about figuring things out. This was a battlefield, and I was standing right in the middle of it, unarmed. The hearing wrapped up for the day, and I pushed myself to my feet. My legs felt like they were made of stone, my mind spinning out of control. Marissa and Silas walked out together, her arm looped through his, her head held high like the battle had already been won. I stayed behind, watching them go, the weight of her words, "this child is yours," echoing in my head. I didn't know what to think anymore. Was she lying? Desperate? Or did she hate me that much? I couldn't figure it out, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them steamroll me like this. Not without a fight. As I sat there in that courtroom, watching Marissa and Silas playing their parts like two actors who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not fear, but a quiet resolve. They thought they had me backed into a corner, thought I'd fold under the weight of her accusations and his smug grin. But I wasn't going to be that guy. Not anymore. Before the hearing even began, Silas leaned in close, so close I could smell his cologne. He whispered, "Should have kept your zipper shut, man." His laugh was low, mocking, like he was daring me to make a move. I didn't. I just stared at him, my face a mask of indifference, then turned my attention back to the table. My hands were steady, and I knew something they didn't. They didn't know that I'd been carrying proof in my back pocket for months. Proof I hadn't planned on using unless they pushed me too far. Well, they had. They'd pushed me past that line. I stayed quiet, letting their lawyer ramble on about my so-called abandonment, listening to Marissa twist the story about how I had left her to handle everything on her own. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. While they were busy painting me as the villain, I was running through every detail that had led me to this moment. Details they thought I missed. Details they thought I'd never find. It started months before she told me she was pregnant. Back when things between us were already unraveling. At first, it was small things, Marissa staying late at work, her phone buzzing at odd hours. When I asked who she was texting, she'd offer a quick excuse, just a friend, or, work stuff, you know how it is. I didn't press it. Didn't want to be that guy. The jealous husband snooping around, checking her phone while she was in the shower. But in the back of my mind, something didn't sit right. I trusted her. I loved her. But trust, it's fragile, and those small things started adding up. One night, I saw her smile at a message, a real smile. The kind she hadn't given me in weeks. I tried to stay casual, asked who it was, but she snapped her phone shut like I'd just crossed a line. "Nobody, Callan. God, why do you care?" Her voice was sharp, defensive, and it planted a doubt in my chest that I couldn't shake. I didn't want to believe she'd cheat, didn't want to believe she'd lie to me like that, but the seed she'd planted, well, it grew, and soon, I couldn't ignore it. I did something I'm not proud of. I hired a private investigator. It wasn't a snap decision. I wrestled with it for days, pacing around my office late at night, asking myself if I was losing it, if I was turning into someone I didn't even recognize. But I needed to know. I needed answers, not just for me, but for the life we were supposed to be building together. So, I made the call. Met a guy named Vince at a diner across town. I handed him a check, no questions asked. He took Marissa's name, her work address, and a photo from our wedding album. "Give me a week," he said, and I nodded, feeling like I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Vince was good. Real good. Within days, he came back with a file, phone logs showing late-night calls to a number I didn't recognize. Dates and times when Marissa wasn't where she said she'd be. Even receipts from a hotel bar, showing she'd met someone there. But the real kicker was the video, grainy, but clear enough, of Marissa and Silas checking into a resort, just 3 days before she handed me that pregnancy test. I watched it alone in my motel room. My stomach twisted as I saw her laugh, her arm wrapped around him, her head tilted the way it used to tilt when she looked at me. I didn't cry, didn't shout. I just sat there, letting it all sink in. She'd been with him, not just once, but for months, while I was working late, trying to build a future for us. The file was locked away in a drawer back at the flat. I told myself I wouldn't use it, not unless I absolutely had to. I didn't want to hurt her. Didn't want to drag everything through that kind of mess. I just needed to understand. To know why she'd pulled away, why our home had become a battleground. Even after I left, I kept that file. Not out of malice, but because it was the only thing that made sense when everything else felt like a blur. Now, sitting in that courtroom, I felt the weight of it again, not the file itself, but everything it represented. Marissa was betting I'd stay silent, that I'd just take whatever they threw at me and pay up. Too proud, or maybe too broken, to fight back. Silas was betting I was as weak as he thought I was. Some spineless guy who ran from responsibility, hiding behind a checkbook. They were wrong. I wasn't the one being unfaithful, not then, not ever. Sure, I messed up. I walked away when I should have stayed. Shut down when I should have spoken. But I wasn't the liar. They were. And I had the proof to show it. I didn't want to use it. I didn't want to turn this into a war where no one wins. But they weren't leaving me any choice. Every word from her lawyer, every little smirk from Silas, and every tear that Marissa dabbed away, it all felt like a show, and I was done being their audience. I sat there, my hands folded in front of me, my face calm, while my mind replayed every detail. The timestamp on the video. The phone logs, showing late-night calls to Silas before she told me she was pregnant. The hotel receipt with her signature, even though she'd claimed she was out with friends. It wasn't just evidence, it was a story. A story they didn't know, and I could see it in their eyes. I thought about the kid, the one she swore was mine. And I wondered, deep down, if she even believed it herself. Did she know the truth and still lie? Or had she convinced herself I was the father because it was easier than facing Silas? I didn't know, and honestly, right then, it didn't matter. What mattered was the game they were playing. They thought I'd fold, thought I'd cave under pressure. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Not because of the money, hell, I would have given it to her if she'd asked, if it was really about the kid. But because of the lie. They were trying to rewrite my life, make me the bad guy in a story I never even wrote. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I stayed quiet, let them think they were winning, let them think I had nothing to say. But inside, I was ready. Ready to show them exactly who they were up against. I'm Callan Rhodes. And as I stood there in that courtroom, I felt the air shift, like the calm before a storm. The judge's eyes were on me, steady and unreadable, while Marissa's lawyer wrapped up his speech, throwing accusations at me like I was some deadbeat who'd never cared. Marissa sat there, her face pretending to be full of pain as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Silas leaned back in his chair, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. They thought they had me. Thought I'd sit there, take the hit, and let their version of the story stick. But I was done. I'd been quiet long enough, letting them talk, letting them believe I had nothing to fight back with. Now it was my turn, and I wasn't going to shout or plead. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. The judge cleared his throat, his eyes moving to me. Mr. Rhodes, do you have anything to say in response to these claims? My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I stood up, opening my jacket like I was preparing for a business meeting. I glanced at Marissa, then at Silas, before turning my attention to the judge. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice calm, controlled. I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't want to drag everything into the open. I thought we could work this out quietly, but she left me no choice. I reached into my wallet, moving slow, deliberate. I pulled out a folded photo I'd kept tucked there for weeks, not for nostalgia, but for this exact moment. It was a still shot, taken from the video my investigator had sent me. The timestamp was clear, the details undeniable. There, in the frame, were Marissa and Silas at a beach resort. Her arms were wrapped around him, both of them grinning like they had no worries in the world. The date on the photo was a full week before she had given the court the pregnancy date. The same one she'd handed me along with that pacifier, telling me I was going to be a dad. I held the photo up for the judge to see, letting the silence linger between us. This is my ex-wife and her new husband, I said, my voice calm, steady. Taken 3 days before she told me she was pregnant. I'd like to submit this, along with other evidence, to show that her claims about me and this child aren't as clear-cut as she's making them out to be. The room seemed to freeze, like everyone was holding their breath. Marissa's face drained of color, her eyes locked on the photo like it was something otherworldly. She couldn't look away. Silas shifted in his chair, his usual smirk gone, replaced by a tight, almost frustrated line that said he hadn't expected this. Her lawyer started to stand, sputtering about relevance, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Let's see it," the judge said, his voice flat but firm. I handed the photo to the bailiff, who passed it over to the judge. I stayed standing, my hands clasped in front of me, watching as the judge studied the photo, his brow furrowing slightly. I didn't need to say much more. The photo spoke for itself. But I wasn't finished yet. I had more to show them, just in case they tried to talk their way out of it. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, but heavy with what it held. "Your Honor," I said, "I also have phone logs showing calls between my ex-wife and Mr. Reed going back months before I left. These were during the time she told me she was working late or out with friends. There's also a hotel receipt from the same resort, signed by her, and a report from a private investigator I hired when I started noticing things weren't adding up." I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to drag this out any longer, but I couldn't let her stand there and claim this child was mine when the timeline was clearly off. I passed the folder to the judge, my voice steady, even though my chest felt like it was being squeezed. I didn't look at Marissa. I couldn't. I didn't want to see her tears, real or fake, or watch her twist this into something else. My gaze stayed fixed on the judge, waiting, knowing I'd done what needed to be done. He took the folder and started flipping through it slowly, his expression giving away nothing. The room was dead quiet except for the soft rustle of papers and a low mutter from Silas. Something about this being ridiculous. Marissa's lawyer jumped to his feet, his voice louder now, accusing me of trying to distract the court, claiming the evidence wasn't verified, saying I was slandering his client. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, letting him flail. The judge didn't even acknowledge him. He just kept reading, pausing over the phone logs, then moving on to the hotel receipt. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at Marissa. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice sharp but calm. "Care to explain this?" It wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what was going on. Marissa opened her mouth like she was going to speak, but then closed it, her hands twisting the tissue in her lap. She glanced at Silas, hoping for some kind of help, but he was staring down at the table, his jaw set tight. Her lawyer tried to make another move, talking about needing more time to review the evidence, but the judge cut him off. "We'll take a recess," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I want everyone back here in an hour. Mr. Rhodes, I'll hold on to these for now." I nodded, taking a seat as the bailiff called for a break. People started shifting around, their whispers filling the room, but I stayed right where I was, staring at the table, feeling the weight of what I'd just done. I hadn't wanted to bring that photo, that folder, into this. I'd hoped I could walk out of there without turning this into a battle. But Marissa had stood there, looked me straight in the eye, and lied in front of everyone, claiming that kid was mine and that I owed her for a life I didn't even choose. And Silas, with his quiet smirks and muttered remarks, had pushed me just far enough that I had no choice but to push back. As the courtroom emptied, I heard Marissa's voice, low and shaky, talking to her lawyer, but I didn't need to listen closely. I didn't need to hear the words. The photo was out there, the folder was with the judge, and whatever came next wasn't in her hands anymore. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my hands steady, my mind clear. For the first time in months, I'd made my move, not out of anger, but because it was the only way to stop their game. Now, all I could do was wait. Wait to see what the judge would say when we came back. I'm Callan Rhodes, and when I walked back into that courtroom after the break, the air felt thick, like something had shifted and couldn't be undone. The judge was already seated, his glasses perched low on his nose, the folder I'd given him open in front of him. Marissa was sitting at her table, her shoulders tense. Her eyes were fixed on her hands like she thought she could avoid the mess she'd made by not looking at it. Silas was right there beside her, his face flushed and his fingers tapping the table like he couldn't sit still for another second. I took my seat alone, no lawyer by my side, just me, holding on to the truth. That photo, those papers, I'd laid them all out. But I didn't feel like I'd won anything. There was no triumph in this moment. Just a hollow ache where the life I once had with Marissa used to be. I wasn't here for victory, I was here to stop the lies. I was here to make sure she and Silas didn't get away with rewriting my life into some story that wasn't mine. The judge didn't waste any time. He turned to Marissa, his voice steady and calm, and asked, "Ms. Reed, care to explain this?" He held up the photo, the one of her and Silas at the resort, time-stamped a full week before she claimed she got pregnant. Her lawyer started to stand up, but Marissa placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. She looked at the judge, her face drained of color, her lips trembling as she searched for words that didn't come. I don't know what to say, Your Honor, she stammered, her voice barely audible. That was a work trip. It doesn't mean what he's saying it does. Her words were fragile, like even she didn't believe them. I didn't react. I didn't shake my head or scoff. I just stayed silent, watching her sink deeper, letting her dig the hole herself. The judge raised an eyebrow, flipping through the folder, then glanced at her again. Again, a work trip, he repeated, his voice flat, giving her a final chance to backpedal. The judge didn't miss a beat. He looked straight at Marissa, then back down at the papers in front of him. Perhaps you can explain the phone log showing calls to Mr. Reed at all hours, he said, his voice level, or the hotel receipt with your signature, also timestamped before the pregnancy date you provided. Marissa's lawyer jumped in, his voice rising as he tried to make a scene. He said they needed time to verify the evidence, suggesting that I could have faked everything and that it wasn't valid without a proper chain of custody. But the judge wasn't having it. He didn't even look at her lawyer, just kept his gaze locked on Marissa. Ms. Reed, he said, his voice firm, I'm asking you directly, is there anything you'd like to clarify about these documents before we proceed? She looked at Silas first, then at me, her eyes glassy with tears that never fell. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd break, maybe she'd tell the truth, whatever that was. But all she did was shake her head. Her voice was so small when she finally spoke, barely above a whisper. No, Your Honor. I don't know what else to say. I heard Silas mutter something under his breath, too low for me to catch, but I saw Marissa flinch at it. The judge closed the folder and turned to me. Mr. Rhodes, he asked, anything further? I stood up, my hands clasped in front of me, my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. Your Honor, I said, I didn't want to bring this here. I didn't want to make this public. Ms. Reed's claiming I'm the father of her child, and the timeline doesn't add up. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I made mistakes. I left when things got hard, but I'm not the one lying here. I'd like the court to order a DNA test to settle this once and for all. The judge nodded, like he'd been expecting that. Marissa's lawyer immediately jumped in, objecting to the DNA test. He said it wasn't necessary, that it would just slow everything down. But the judge cut him off, holding up his hand. Counselor, sit down, he said firmly. He looked at the evidence, the gaps in Marissa's story, and then turned his attention back to her. Given the evidence presented and the discrepancies in Ms. Reed's claims, a DNA test is reasonable. His voice hardened as he continued, Ms. Reed, you've made some serious allegations in this court. If they're true, the test will confirm it. If they're not, there will be consequences for misleading this court. Marissa didn't respond. She didn't even look up. She just stared down at her hands, the tissue in her lap twisted into a tight ball. Silas, sitting next to her, slowly leaned away, the chair creaking beneath him like he was trying to distance himself from the whole mess. The judge wrote something down, then looked up at us. We'll order a DNA test immediately. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks with the results. In the meantime, I'm holding Ms. Reed's financial claims in abeyance. Mr. Rhodes, you're to cooperate with the testing process. Understood? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. With that, he slammed his gavel down, and just like that, the hearing was over. The room started to come alive with movement, chairs scraping, people murmuring, but I stayed where I was, eyes locked on Marissa and Silas. She still wouldn't look at me. She didn't stand up right away. Instead, she sat there, her shoulders shaking as if she were trying to hold back a sob. Silas grabbed his jacket, his face twisted between anger and embarrassment, and muttered something to her lawyer before heading for the door. I didn't care about his looks or his whispers. None of it mattered. All that mattered now was the truth, and it was coming whether they liked it or not. As I gathered my things, I felt the weight of that photo in my wallet lighten. It was like I'd finally let go of something that had been weighing on me for way too long. I'd laid everything out, the video, the call logs, the receipt. And still, I didn't feel good about it. Didn't feel like I'd won any kind of victory. I just felt tired, like I'd been running for months and could finally stop. I walked out of the courtroom, passing Marissa's table on the way. I could hear her lawyer in the background, mumbling something about damage control, but I didn't stop to listen. Marissa looked up at me for a moment. For just a second, her eyes were red, her face a mix of fear and maybe something else, regret, defiance, or both. I didn't stop, didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I'd done what I had to do, not to hurt her, but to protect myself from a lie I didn't deserve. Outside, the air was cool, the sky overcast. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing slowly, letting it all sink in. The test was coming, and with it, the truth, whatever that would be. I had no idea what Marissa would do next. Whether she'd try to fight it, or run. All I knew was that I'd done my part. I'd shown them I wasn't the fool they thought I was, and now the rest was out of my hands. I walked to my car, my steps steady, my mind clear. 2 weeks, and this would be over, one way or another. I'm Callan Rhodes. And those 2 weeks waiting for the DNA test results felt like I was holding my breath underwater, each day stretching longer than the one before. I went through the motions, work meetings, late nights coding, but my mind was always stuck in that courtroom, on Marissa's pale face when I showed the judge that photo, and Silas's smirk turning into something sour. I had no idea what I'd feel when the results came back. I didn't know if I wanted to be right or wrong about the kid. All I knew was that I needed the truth. Not just for me, but to finally close the door on the life I thought I had with her. The day of the hearing came, and I drove to the courthouse. My hands were tight on the wheel, my suit pressed and sharp, but my nerves were a mess. When I walked in, everything felt the same. The same crowded room, the same faces whispering behind hands, but something was different. It felt like the story was finally about to end, not just take another turn. Marissa was sitting there at her table, stiff as a board. Her hands were folded over her belly, bigger now, a reminder that time hadn't stopped for any of us. Silas was next to her, but he didn't even look at me. No cocky grin this time. His eyes were glued to the floor, his jaw tight, like he knew something I didn't. I took my seat, sitting alone again. No lawyer. Just me and the weight of whatever was coming. The judge didn't waste any time. He walked in, robe swishing, and sat down with a sealed envelope in his hands. My stomach twisted at the sight, but I kept my face still, my hands folded neatly on the table. He opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and read it silently. His face gave nothing away. The room was so quiet I could hear the shuffle of Marissa's lawyer's papers, Silas's foot tapping nervously under the table. Then, finally, the judge looked up, his gaze moving from me to Marissa, then back to me. "The results of the DNA test are conclusive," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "Mr. Rhodes, you are not the biological father of the child." The words hit me hard, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't like getting blindsided by a punch. It was more like waking up, feeling the weight of reality settle into my chest. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just sat there, letting it sink in. I'd suspected it. I'd prepared myself for it, even bet on it when I showed the judge that photo and those logs. But hearing it out loud was different. It felt final. The kid wasn't mine. Marissa hadn't just lied to me, she'd lied to the court, to everyone, and now it was all out in the open. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I could feel the room shift, the quiet murmur of disbelief growing behind me. A gasp from somewhere in the back. People leaning forward, eager for what came next. But the judge wasn't done. He set the paper down and turned his attention to Marissa, his voice taking on a harder edge, like he was holding back anger. "Ms. Reed, you've made claims in this court that have been proven false. You've attempted to mislead this court, misrepresent facts, and commit paternity fraud. That's not something we can overlook." Marissa didn't say a word. She didn't move. I stole a quick glance at her, just long enough to see her staring down at the table, her face drained of color. Her hands were clasped tightly together, so tight that her knuckles turned white. Silas was sitting next to her, but his posture had completely crumbled. His head dropped into his hands like he was trying to disappear. Her lawyer began to rise, talking about mitigating circumstances, about Marissa's emotional state, but the judge didn't even let him finish. With a sharp motion, he raised his hand to silence him. "I'm not interested in excuses," the judge said firmly. "This court relies on truth, and you've wasted its time and resources. I will be considering sanctions, including fines, and a public record of this fraud." The judge paused and looked back down at his notes before continuing. "Your financial claims against Mr. Rhodes are dismissed, effective immediately." He scribbled something on his paper, the sound of his pen scraping the page filling the silent room. "This matter is concluded for now. But Ms. Reed, I strongly suggest you consult with your counsel about the legal consequences you're facing." He slammed the gavel down. And just like that, it was over. The room erupted into whispers, people shifting in their seats, chairs scraping against the floor. But I didn't move. I stayed where I was, hands still folded on the table, my eyes fixed on the surface in front of me. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt hollow. Like I'd been carrying something heavy inside me for so long, I didn't even know how to stand without it. Marissa's lawyer was leaning in close to her, whispering quickly, but she didn't even react. Didn't look up. Silas stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out without a word. His pace was quick, like he couldn't get out of there fast enough. I watched him leave, his shoulders slumped, and I wondered what he'd say to her later, if he'd even stay by her now that everything had crumbled. But I didn't care. Not really. It was more like I was watching something unfold in a movie that had no meaning to me anymore. The judge stood, leaving the bench, and the bailiff started ushering everyone out. I gathered my things, my notebook, my pen, and the empty wallet that used to hold that photo, and stood up, my legs steady. My mind was still spinning, but I'd gotten what I wanted. The truth was clear now, right there in that official document, undeniable. I wasn't tied to her anymore. Not by a kid. Not by a lie. But even with that finality, it didn't feel like freedom. Not yet. It felt more like the end of something I hadn't wanted to lose, even if it had never been real in the first place. As I walked toward the door, I heard Marissa's voice, soft and shaky, saying something to her lawyer, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I'd seen enough. I'd heard enough. The test had done what it was supposed to, and I'd done what I had to. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the cool air of the courthouse hit me, sharp and refreshing, like it was waking me up. I didn't know what Marissa would do now. Fight the sanctions, try to explain herself, or just vanish with Silas. I didn't have to know anymore, and for the first time in months, I felt like I didn't need to. The truth was out there, and it wasn't my problem anymore. I made my way down the steps, the sound of my shoes echoing against the concrete, heading for my car. The sky was clear, the sun hanging low on the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself take a slow, steady breath. It wasn't all over, not completely, but it was close enough. And for now, that had to be enough. I'm Callan Rhodes, and stepping out of that courthouse felt like stepping out of a fog I'd been lost in for what seemed like forever. The air was crisp, sharp enough to bite at my lungs, and it reminded me I was still here, still alive. I stood there, hands stuffed in my pockets, watching cars roll past, people moving through their day like nothing had changed. I guess for them, nothing had. But for me? Everything had. The judge's words still rang in my head, Marissa's claims dismissed, the sanctions coming, the DNA test confirming what I already knew. I'd gotten what I came for. The truth was right there for anyone to see. But it didn't feel like a victory, not the way I expected it to. It felt more like closing a book I never wanted to finish, one I'd hoped had a different ending. As I started to walk away, I heard her voice behind me, soft and trembling. Callan. It was Marissa, standing by the courthouse doors, her coat wrapped tightly around her like she was trying to keep herself together. Her face was pale against the gray sky. I stopped, not because I wanted to talk, but because there was something in her voice, something broken, like she was holding herself up by a thin thread. I turned around, keeping my distance, and really looked at her for the first time in months. Her eyes were red, her hands nervously twisting the strap of her purse. And for a moment, I saw the woman I'd once married, not the one who had dragged me through this nightmare. I just wanted security, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't think it would get this far. Her words hung in the air, fragile, as if she believed they could fix something. But I didn't move. I didn't soften. No. I said, my voice even but firm, you thought I wouldn't fight back. Her face crumpled, and the tears spilled over. But I didn't take a step closer, didn't offer her comfort. I'd spent too much time carrying her pain, letting it twist me into someone I didn't even recognize anymore. She opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize. But I shook my head. Marissa, it's done. You made your choices. I made mine. I turned and walked away, my steps steady, her quiet sobs fading behind me. I didn't look back. Halfway to my car, I spotted Silas in the parking lot, pacing by a black SUV, his phone pressed to his ear. He was yelling, his free hand waving as if the world owed him something. Something about needing space, not signing up for any of this. He didn't see me, and I didn't stop. I just kept walking, letting his voice fade into the hum of the city around me. Whatever was happening between them wasn't my problem anymore. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and pulled away. I wasn't sure where I was going at first, just needing to get away, needing to move. The city stretched out before me, and I let the road guide me. I blurred past the shops, the lights, the people, letting my mind settle as the weight of the day sank in. I'd fought for myself, not out of hatred, but because I had no other choice. I'd shown them I wasn't the fool they thought I was. And now, I was free. Not just from Marissa's lies, but from the version of me that had allowed them to happen. A week later, I got a letter from the court. The judge had followed through. Marissa was officially listed with a public record for paternity fraud, and all her claims against me had been dismissed. I read it once, then set it aside. It didn't change anything. Didn't erase the months of uncertainty or the nights spent wondering where I'd gone wrong. But it was closure, and that was enough. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it, didn't share the details with my friends. I just went back to work, back to building my startup, back to the life I'd put on hold for too long. That same week, I did something I hadn't planned on. I got a refund from the private investigator, some overpayment he didn't need. Instead of pocketing it, I donated it to a legal fund for fathers stuck in custody battles. It wasn't much, just a few $100, but it felt right. Like I was passing on the chance I'd had to fight back. I didn't need the money. I didn't need the reminder of what it had cost me. I just wanted it to help someone else trapped in the same mess I'd been in, someone who needed proof to stand up for themselves. The days after that were calm. Not the heavy silence I'd felt before, but something steady, like a quiet rhythm settling in. I started running again, something I hadn't done since the time Marissa and I were together. I'd wake up early, the streets still dark, my breath puffing out in the cold. I'd push myself until my legs burned and my mind cleared. It wasn't about forgetting her. It was about remembering who I was before everything fell apart, before the lies, before the doubt. Before I let her decisions control mine. After each run, I'd come back to my flat, shower, and dive straight into work, coding, meeting with investors, watching my app grow into something tangible, something I'd created despite everything. I didn't hate Marissa. I didn't wish her pain, not after all that had happened. I just didn't want her taking up space in my head anymore. I needed to move forward, not keep staring at a past that wasn't mine to rewrite. One night, I sat on the couch, a beer in hand, and thought about the kid, not mine, but still hers, still real. I wondered what she'd tell him one day, how she'd explain his father, the one who wasn't me, and the fight she'd lost. I hoped she'd do better for him than she'd done for me. I hoped she'd find a way to be honest, even when it was hard. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story was here, sitting in this apartment, working, choosing a different life now. I set the beer down, leaned back, and closed my eyes, feeling the quiet wrap around me. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was mine. I'd earned it. Not by shouting, not by fighting dirty, but by standing there with nothing but proof in my hands, a photo, a file, and a truth I refused to bury. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. Not just get by, but actually live, on my own terms. No strings. No ghosts pulling me backward. My name's Aaron Mercer, and a few months after that courtroom emptied out, I finally felt like life belonged to me again. It wasn't the same life I had before Lena, not even in the same universe, but it was something new. Something quieter. Something I was building slowly, piece by piece, without anyone else writing the rules. I didn't bring up the case anymore. Didn't post cryptic lines on social media. Didn't sit around with friends dissecting every brutal detail over drinks. I let it sit where it belonged, in the past. It was like a bruise, painful at first, ugly for a while, but one day you catch your reflection and realize it's almost gone. You stop noticing. The startup kept me moving anyway. Faster than I thought it would, honestly. More users were signing up every day. Investors started calling. The little app I'd built in the middle of all that chaos? It was turning into something people actually needed. I'd lose myself in the work, coding for hours, adjusting features, making pitches, and for the first time in a long time, it felt good to have something real in my hands. Something solid. Something I could shape without feeling like it was going to slip away. Nights were quieter now. Just me in my little flat downtown. I'd cook simple meals, nothing fancy, throw on an old movie, and let the noise of the world fade out for a while. I wasn't running anymore. Not after Lena. Not for anyone. Not even for me. I was just living. And honestly, that was enough. I'd started dating again, slowly, cautiously, nothing serious. Trust wasn't something that bounced back overnight. Not after what I'd been through. It's like a muscle. After you break it, you don't jump right back into lifting heavy. You start small. Careful. One steady rep at a time. There was this woman I worked with, her name was Elise. We'd grab coffee every now and then, usually at this little spot across from the office where the line was always too long, but the coffee was worth it. She had this easy laugh, the kind that made the air feel lighter, and she asked questions like she actually cared about the answer. I liked that about her. I liked that she never pushed for more than I was ready to give. We'd talk, nothing heavy. I'd tell her about the latest bug I'd squashed in my app, or some ridiculous thing that happened in a client meeting, and she'd listen with this calm, steady interest. No expectations. No pressure. Just presence. And after everything I'd been through, that was exactly what I needed. It wasn't love, not even close, but it was something. It was a start. A reminder that not every story has to end the way mine did with Naomi. I didn't need grand gestures or some movie scene romance. What I needed were real moments, simple, honest ones, and Elise gave me that without asking for anything in return. I learned healing doesn't announce itself. It's not this big cinematic moment where everything suddenly feels right again. It sneaks up on you. Quiet. Patient. Like the seasons changing without you realizing. I'd catch myself smiling at the smallest things, an early morning run that cleared my head, landing a new partnership for the app, the sound of rain drifting in through the window while I cooked dinner. And little by little, I noticed I wasn't carrying that same weight anymore. Naomi's name didn't sting when it crossed my mind. It didn't drag me back to that courtroom or to the hollow townhouse we once shared. She was part of my past now, not my present. And I was genuinely okay with that. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her any harm. Honestly, I just hoped she was living her life, far from mine, and finding whatever peace she needed. I meant that. Then one evening, I got this letter. It came in a plain envelope, forwarded to my new apartment by the clerk from the judge's office. It wasn't about Naomi. It wasn't about the case. It was about something else, something bigger. And as I sat there holding it, I knew life wasn't done surprising me yet. I remember sitting at my small kitchen table that afternoon, sun barely coming through the window, just staring at this letter I'd gotten in the mail. I must have read it twice, maybe 3 times. It wasn't flashy. No fancy seal. Just a plain envelope from the clerk's office, forwarded to my new address. The kind of thing you almost toss without opening. Turned out, my testimony, the way I'd handled myself during the whole mess with Erin, had ended up being used in a legal reform case. Something about strengthening protections for men caught in paternity fraud cases. I sat there for a while, sandwich half-eaten in front of me, coffee gone cold. It wasn't some congratulations letter or anything like that, just a note saying my story mattered. That what I'd gone through was helping change things for someone else. I folded it up quietly, slid it into the back of the kitchen drawer where I kept random stuff, spare keys, batteries, old receipts. Took a sip of my coffee like nothing had changed. I didn't need recognition. I wasn't looking to be some hero in a fight I never wanted to be part of. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't mean something, knowing I left a mark. Even if it was small. Even if no one ever knew my name. Sometimes my mind still drifted to her kids. Not mine, never were. Probably Bryce's. Or maybe someone else's, didn't matter to me anymore. I'd wonder sometimes what kind of life they were going to have. What Erin would tell them when they asked about their dad. About those years where everything unraveled. Part of me hoped she'd tell them something honest. Or at least something gentle. But that wasn't my burden to carry. That chapter wasn't mine. My place was here, in my quiet little life, in the early mornings I'd carved out for myself, in the work I'd thrown myself back into, in the slow, careful way I was letting people back in again. I didn't keep anything from the trial, no photos, no documents, nothing like that. Except for one thing. A line I scribbled in an old notebook during one of those sleepless nights waiting for the DNA results to come back. I never said it in court. Didn't have to. But it stuck with me. Truth doesn't have to be loud. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it ends the noise. I remember writing that line late one night, half awake, sitting on the edge of my bed with a beat-up old notebook in my lap. The apartment was dead quiet except for the hum of the fridge down the hall. I'd been turning everything over in my head, trying to figure out why I wasn't screaming, why I wasn't losing my mind at Erin or Bryce the way they'd come after me. But the more I sat with it, the more it made sense. You don't have to raise your voice to be right. Truth doesn't need noise. Proof doesn't need a spotlight. That little line I scribbled down stuck with me for months afterward. I'd come across it sometimes when I was sorting through papers or cleaning out my desk drawers, and it would just settle me. It reminded me that I didn't go through all of that for payback. I didn't walk into that courtroom to burn anyone down. I did it because I needed peace. For me. Life moves forward, it always does. Not long after, my app finally hit its first real milestone, 10,000 downloads in a month. It wasn't flashy, but it felt good. I took my small team out for pizza at this hole-in-the-wall place near our office. Nothing fancy, red plastic cups, cheap wine, stupid jokes flying across the table like we were back in college. And there was Sarah, sitting right across from me, laughing at something dumb I'd said. Her smile caught me off guard a little. Warm. Easy. And for the first time in a long while, I caught myself thinking, maybe I could let her in, not all at once, but a little at a time. Maybe I could risk it again without assuming it was all going to blow up in my face. I didn't push it. Didn't have to. Time wasn't something I was running from anymore. I had space to move slow. Lately, I've been running longer in the mornings, through the parks, down the quiet streets before the city really wakes up. It's peaceful out there. I'd pass families sometimes, moms and dads pushing strollers, kids chasing after dogs, and it didn't sting the way it used to. It wasn't regret. It wasn't bitterness. It was just this small ache, this pull, for something I might want one day. On my terms. In my time. When I was finally ready, really ready, I could feel it coming. I wasn't there yet, not completely, but I could see the shape of it out there somewhere, just barely on the edge of my life like the faint line of a horizon. And for me, that was enough. I never heard from Erin again after everything. I didn't expect to. I didn't know where she ended up, didn't care to look. Maybe she was still with Marcus, maybe not. Maybe the fines hit her hard, or maybe she spun some new story to land on her feet like she always did. I didn't check. I didn't ask. Whatever came of her life wasn't mine to hold anymore. I let her go. Not in some grand, forgiving way, no speech, no closure, just quiet indifference. That kind of release that happens when you finally understand someone's choices aren't yours to carry. They never were. My life was mine now, messy, rough around the edges, but real. And I was building it back slow, choice by choice, mistake by mistake. That night after I sent the letter, after I said what I needed to say, I sat on my couch in my small apartment, the low hum of the city bleeding in through the cracked window. And I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't peace exactly, not yet, but it was close. It was a stillness that didn't ache anymore. A kind of quiet that felt like a clearing in my chest, space where I could just be me. Noah Easton. Not the guy who got lied to. Not the fool who got dragged through court. Just me. And I'd fought for that space, not with shouting or bitterness, but with patience and truth. And now I was here, finally standing in it. Breathing easy. One steady breath at a time.